Well, with as far as character assassinations, and you see a lot of this in social media. And I don't know if some of these guys that have been victims of some of the shootings were choir boys. They may have a criminal history. You know, I'm sure if we dig enough in everybody's past, everybody's got something. But when these people become the center of a scene in this theater that seems to be playing out over and over and over again, you know, we look at the event, whether it's the murder, shooting, however we want to phrase it, that's there center stage. We see the actors. Everybody, the first thing that we find is that we got a character assassinated. We don't even know the officer's name. You usually hear the name has not been released. And I've never been through that, but I can understand that, why you would do that. I can understand that. You know, and a lot of times you'll hear we're not going to release the victim's name until we've notified the next of kin. As soon as that's done, not only do you get the victim's name, but by the next morning, the victim, who's now 29, we find out he's 16. He was kicked out of high school for possession of marijuana. When he was 12, you know, he skipped a class in high school. He's had 3 speeding tickets. We know their entire history. The thing hasn't even gone to trial. 3rd, 4th day of investigation. And we know every single thing about the victim or the person, the dead person, but we still don't know what happened that day. Isn't that ironic? We know more about the dead person and what they did in the past than we do about what happened that second. What was that person doing? That's more important to me as a citizen viewing the news or even as an officer. What you're doing to me now, if, for instance, if you attacked me and I said, well, I was in fear of my life, so I shot him. I'm not in fear of, well, he skipped school 9 years ago, and I'm in fear because he possessed marijuana 13 years ago. I'm dealing with what's immediate. I'm acting upon what's immediate. But it seems like with some of these victims, this long litany of their criminal history comes into play, and it somehow becomes a defining factor of why somebody did something right now. And then nobody ever asked the question, well, did that officer know that long litany of criminal history? Did he know it at that moment? Of course he didn't. He's reacting according to what happened. And I think when we release all this, we taint juries, because the jury is not going to see that person the same. Okay, if you look at the Tamir Rice incident, Tamir Rice was a little kid. He didn't have a history for them to smear. There wasn't a long history out there on Tamir Rice. So, you know, if he would have been, if he'd have been stopped for jaywalking probably 2 years beforehand, sure, that would have been out there. Most people knew more about Michael Brown than they knew about Ferguson. And I'm not going to condone whether what happened to Michael Brown was justified or not justified. Everybody's got their opinions on it. But look at how much we knew about his character, but how much did we know about the officer? So if you're gonna look at these things, if you're gonna release information on one, release information on both. If you say, well, we can't release the officer's information because it may taint the investigation. Well, how is releasing the information of the victim not tainting the investigation? Be fair across the board. If you're gonna do it, you can release basic information, but when you get into extensive criminal history stuff, it's got nothing to do with that call at that time. Aren't you slanting a jury? I mean, you got some of these high-profile incidents that are going on. The juries, potential jurors, you can have a 200-300 person jury pool. They know more about the history of the person that's dead than they do about their immediate family. How many brothers and sisters do they have? Where'd they go to school? They don't know any of that, but they know all the bad stuff. Why? Because that's what's released by both the media, and then we got to say, well, where'd the media get their facts from? You know, if you're gonna be fair and impartial, be fair and impartial, and that's something that enrages a lot of the inner city community. Is why do we move to character assassination of the focal point of the investigation, but that you won't tell us the officer's name? How many times has the officer been divorced? How many times has he been disciplined within the department? What has he been disciplined for, or she been disciplined for? Is there a pattern of anger or rage or whatever that may have something to do with what happened here? Oh, we can't release that. Oh, but this guy's dead and we know everything about him. Well, if we release that, it might taint the investigation. Okay, but what about all this information on the dead guy? What do those 12 people think of him now? I mean, if you say, you know, this guy, he's 6'4", he's black, he's got tattoos, and he threatened me and he did all these things. And you're talking about how bad a person I am. And somebody walks up and they sees me, what are they going to think immediately? Yeah, it must have been him, I heard about him. That's fair? No, it's not. But we see it all the time. And then you have, like I said, we'll go back to what does the community say? We're not getting a fair shake. Nobody's listening to us. We're trying to speak about a condition, communication. We're screaming, but nobody hears us. And then you hear us, but you're not listening to us. And then you're listening to us, but you're dismissing us. By that, what I mean is you hear there's a problem, so you call a meeting. You listen to me speak at the meeting, but then you leave and do nothing. And then you wonder why you have these volcanic eruptions of violence. I'm not condoning rioting and looting. I think it's ridiculous to tear up the only town you live in. But when you're not being heard and listened to, how do you expect people to react? You know, the people of Baltimore that complained about all the outrage and the indiscretions within that department for years, since I was little growing up. And I grew up in Pennsylvania, but it's close enough. You hear things, and they were blown off all these years. Now the Department of Justice goes in there in 2016 and says, here's a litany of problems. And what I loved, had the chief and the mayor sitting there while they read it off. That's what you call instant accountability. And you watch both of their positions. Neither one of them could really look at the camera. They're looking down. They're twiddling their thumbs. They're nervous. Why are you nervous? Either you didn't know this was going on or you knew and did nothing. But either way, if you didn't know, why didn't you know? And if you did know and didn't do anything, why didn't you? So it doesn't matter that the mayor's black and the chief is white, both of them. How can you be in basically what was a cesspool of racism and people being picked on, and you're sitting there while the Department of Justice official reads all this off? And I'm giving credit for standing out there, because there's not a lot of people who would have had the courage to do that. They'd have set her up there on a podium by herself. But, so what's your answer to it? Are you going to let the community get involved? And that, you know, you never heard the blue wall of silence there. I don't know if people watched that DOJ finding in Baltimore. You didn't hear the words blue wall of silence mentioned. Nobody talks about it. In fact, if you research it in public speaking, the only time you'll ever hear it brought up is when Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat in New York, brought it up when he was interviewing Sheriff Clark from Milwaukee. And he says, I noticed today you haven't mentioned the blue wall of silence. Nobody wants to talk about that. But we want to have dialogue, and we want to have open, free community dialogue, which does exist with a lot of individual officers. Their color doesn't matter. Their officers citizens trust because that officer individually is transparent. It's not out of respect for a badge or some commitment to the subjugation of authority because this person is an authority figure. It's because that person in the community can relate with that officer. And that's something officers need to establish. Don't do it for the police department. Because if you get put in a bad situation, the police department will throw you out there. And you're on your own, with you and whatever union officials you can get. That's the way, you know, the machine is made. You know, but you got to insulate yourself with the community and be transparent. That doesn't mean you can't have good working relationships with officers. But at some point in all of this, you got to find what's your niche and are you willing to speak up and believe in what you're saying.